When Germany began its secret rearmament campaign in 1930, it knew from its successful Zeppelin and Gotha raids in World War I that it would need a reliable heavy bomber. In the search for a plane to fill the role while rebuilding the Luftwaffe, Heinkel Aircraft Works would be chosen alongside a consortium of other aviation firms to submit proposals for a design. These mandates were, technically, to develop a civilian transport for mail with Lufthansa, but hindsight makes it clear from the outset that converting them to bombers was always the plan. Dr. Ernst Heinkel at Heinkel Aircraft Works tasked the brothers Siegfried and Walter Gunther with creating their company's proposal. The first submission the brothers would develop would be the HE-70 Blitz in 1933, a single-engine monoplane that could act as, publicly, a mail carrier and passenger, and secretly, a bomber and reconnaissance aircraft. Though the Heinkel 70 was decent as a single-engine aircraft, and found some notable civilian use lasting till 1954 with Spain, it was quickly replaced by the Dornier Do-17 in the prospective bomber role, and taught the brothers that any future bomber would also need to be a twin-engine aircraft in order to keep up with payload, range, and speed. So, they took the Heinkel 70 and made it into a twin-engine aircraft. It used the same style of wings, the same engines, and the same control surfaces to the point that the now prototype Heinkel 111 garnered the nickname of Double Blitz. Construction of the first prototype would finish in February of 1935, quickly followed by its first flight of the 24th. It was reportedly very easily flown and incredibly stable, and quickly garnered the attention of the newly formed Ministry of Aviation, who put in an order for production with Heinkel. Barring a brief and otherwise unnoteworthy use with the Chinese during the Second Sino-Japanese War, its first real trial of combat would be in the skies above Spain during the Spanish Civil War. The early model Heinkel 111s were sent with several other German bombers to not only support Franco's nationalist forces, but also to evaluate their effectiveness in real combat, rather than theoretical war games or on-paper statistics. Heinkel 111s proved to be superior to the other German bombers, by a significant margin in not only payload but also speed. During their time in the Spanish skies, only 21 out of the 94 sent were destroyed by enemy action. It was so successful even that after the war, Spain would use the Heinkel 111 as the backbone for their bomber force, and would produce under license the Casa Tu-111 post-war. In the interim between the Spanish Civil War and the invasion of Poland in 1939, a stepless glazed canopy would be installed to give it its iconic asymmetrical greenhouse nose. It would also switch from the Daimler-Benz DB601 power plant to the Junkers Jumo Tu-111, which was not only more powerful, if slightly heavier, but also more available, as DB601s were being rationed for Me-109s. These kinds of refinements would ultimately lead to the H model, which would become the most produced and used variant of the Heinkel 111. With the invasion of Poland in 1939, Heinkel 111s would bombard Poland with near impunity as Germany established air superiority. Polish fighters like the PZL P-11 were not fast enough to properly intercept the German Heinkels, though they tried regardless and gave all that they could in the defense of their homeland. After Poland fell and Germany turned its attention to France, the Heinkel 111 would come up against the combined French and British expeditionary forces, which proved to be more formidable. Though France would fall in little under 2 months, the combat losses of the Heinkel 111s were much higher than that compared to the Polish campaign, as their combined air forces had higher numbers of more modern aircraft. This would establish a trend line for the Heinkel 111, as every subsequent usage saw its loss rates only rise more and more. After Operation Dynamo and the Dunkirk evacuations would come the Battle of Britain, where the Heinkel 111 is best known as the primary antagonist of the aircraft involved. It's the one that's commonly seen in the gun sights of a Spitfire or Hurricane, whether it be movies like Guy Hamilton's Battle of Britain from 1969, Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk from 2017, video games in the form of Isle 2 Sturmovik and War Thunder, or even historical documentaries and archival gun cam footage. Heinkel 111s bombarded RAF bases and logistical infrastructures during the opening hours of the Battle of Britain, and would be the primary bomber Germany used throughout the struggle for air dominance, as the Do-17s had insufficient range and payload, and the Ju-88 suffered teething problems from introduction. The RAF, after rallying back from the initial opening blows, met the Heinkel 111s and utterly annihilated them, with Spitfires and Hurricanes, assisted by the chain-home early warning radar system and doubting ground control intercept. The Luftwaffe's losses during the Battle of Britain would be astronomically high, with the planned invasion of Britain, Operation Sea Lion, eventually being cancelled due to the inability for the Luftwaffe to maintain absolute air superiority, an arrogant belief they thought they could achieve from their earlier successes in Poland and France. The Luftwaffe would turn to general bombing of the British Isles in what would be known as the Blitz, hitting industrial, military, and civilian targets, leading to over 40,000 dead British civilians, mostly in London where the bombing was heaviest. Despite the nightly air raids, the British public would hold firm, hiding out in bomb shelters and the Metro Underground, eventually leading to the famous motto, "Keep calm and carry on." Following the Blitz's conclusion in mid-1941, Germany would lead into Operation Barbarossa, which initially went off well for Germany, with Heinkel 111s performing their signature strategic and tactical bombing to a T, air superiority keeping them safe from the VVS. But as the Eastern Front dragged on, and momentum slowed, the VVS reorganized and soon began to challenge the Germans' air superiority. The Heinkel 111, once having been world-leading in bomber capability, was now horrendously out of date, and the Russian interceptors preyed upon them relentlessly. By late 1943, it was clear that Heinkel 111s were no longer fit for frontline service, even with all the intervening upgrades of newer engines and technologies thrown into them. Newer bombers like the Heinkel 177 Grief, as on fire as it often was, and the Dornier 217 were entering into service alongside upgraded Ju-88s to replace them. This would lead the Heinkel 111 to be relegated to transport and logistics, with the production ending in 1944 completely. It should also be mentioned that as momentum slowed, the doctrine of the Luftwaffe turned away from strategic bombing to focus more on close air support and tactical bombing, which would be why the Heinkel 177 Grief, Dornier 217, and other similar heavy bombers were not produced in large numbers. Heinkel 111s would, however, continue to fulfill other roles until war's end, like maritime patrols in the interim, being famously used as a platform for both Fritz X and HS-293 glide bombs used against Allied warships before being retired for newer platforms. With the war's end, many of the 6,500 Heinkel 111s produced would either be, at this point, smoking craters in the ground scattered across Russia and Britain, or scrapped. Very few original examples survive to this day, with only 5 on display throughout Europe. There are, however, 12 surviving Casa 2 111s, some of which are on display as their original namesakes with German camouflage.